We are back for hour 3, folks. It is Dynasty 365 this time. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards. With me, I got Drew Scott, host of Fourth and Frames. We got JT Orange, our co-host here on Shoot the Gap. And tonight, as promised, all evening long, we promised we were going to be giving you our rookie prospect running back breakdown, letting you know what do we like about these running backs, how will they be impactful for you from a fantasy standpoint, not necessarily from a pro football standpoint. This is what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about fantasies. Well, no, not about fantasies. Haha.
Yeah, we are.
Hey, fantasies is my top 2 running backs end up both in the top 5, and I win the championship. That's the fantasy right there.
I love it. We'll get to everybody's fantasies after we get back right from this. So, yes, folks, we are here to talk about some running backs. But before we get to that, we are the last show of the evening, which means we can kind of go off the rails however we want. And so with that being said, Drew Scott, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful, man. I'm not on the third hour of a 3-hour fantasy football marathon, so I feel very well rested. You can't tell by the way I'm speaking. And ready to talk about this rookie running back class, man. This is an exciting one, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, besides this show, what I'm looking forward to is you getting the gang back together for Fourth and Frames next week when the
Absolutely
Fantasy Frames network of shows, which I feel is like growing every single week. It's almost hard to keep track of in a good way. The core Fantasy and Frames ones outside of the Daily Fix, we got Dynasty 365, we got Shoot the Gap, we got Fourth and Frames coming back at 10 p.m. Eastern. You, Rhett Manuel, Rhett Manuel, we have missed you. We can't wait to get you back to talk about fantasy football, talk about football in general. We can talk about anything. We can talk about movies for all I care. Like just seeing your face again will be great to see, and seeing everybody on Fourth and Frames will be a fantastic thing. I think what you guys are going to be covering the rookie or the free agency fallout thus far at that point.
You got it. Yep, we're gonna react to the free agency news, and we've got 2 confirmed guests. We got the new guy Aiden, as well as who else just confirmed? I just went blank. Hang on, Kyle Ziegler. He's gonna join us as well. Nice. So we're gonna have 2. Kyle's not new to Fantasy and Frames necessarily, but I think this is his first time on Fourth and Frames. And I've been trying for like 2 years to get him on the show, and work schedule just hasn't allowed it to happen. And it's finally happened. So whatever he DM'd me tonight to let me know that his schedule finally opened up for a guest appearance, took him up on it immediately. So yeah, it'll be me, Rhett, and Nate, and then a couple new faces as well. So that's going to be a fun one.
Love it. And speaking of new faces, we got people dropping articles who are new faces left and right. Shout out to Aiden. Literally started on Friday, has written like 8 articles already over at fantasyandframes.com, so don't forget to go check that out over there. After tonight's show, we will start releasing our pre-NFL draft rookie rankings over at fantasyandframes.com. But really check out our articles. We're breaking down all the breaking news here in the world of the NFL and how that ties into fantasy football. We'll get some IDP breaking news articles coming out soon as well. Yeah, it's just, it's crazy. The new year is here. All these trades, all these transactions are now officially official. And, just as the NFL is kicking off into the new year, so are we here at Fantasy and Frame. So we cannot wait to pump out all this content for you so you all can enjoy it, have a good time, and get ready to dominate your leagues this year. And we got the real Rob Thomas from Matchbox 20 in the chat right now. Thomas, I don't know if that was insulting to you or not, Rob, so apologies if you're not a Matchbox 20 fan. But let's face it, who isn't a Matchbox 20 fan? So with that being said, let's get into the plethora of running backs in this rookie class that we think could be fantasy viable or maybe not fantasy viable, depending on how you're looking at things. So we'll cover them. And then at the end of the show, we will give you our top 5 favorite running backs. But let's get the alpha out of the way. Let's get the one that people have been talking about since the playoffs, since all season long. I mean, I feel like this guy's name has just been like branded into everybody's skull. And that's Cam Scatterbo. Let's get into him. Like, this is what the people want to know. This is what the people are here for to see.
The people's champion, Cam Scatterbo.
Is it Scatterbo or Scatterbo? We can make a combination on that.
I think it's Scatterbo, but I just feel like Scatterboo is so much cooler. Like you be like Scatterboo. So I always like to say that. I think it's Scatterbo though, but I have never had a problem just changing people's names because I just don't care. I'll just call them what I want. So that's what I do.
Rob in the chat. Why should I change my name? I'm not the one who sucks. You bite your tongue. Rob Thomas.
Great reference. Office Space. I love it.
It's
Rob just went like way up on my list with that quote from Office Space. That's phenomenal. One of my favorites.
We look here, some of the advanced methods here, courtesy of PFF. One of the things we like to look at is not just production, but how efficient they are in their production. Per the 20% of snaps played last year in the 2025 draft class, eligible running backs, he ranks 16th in yards after contact per attempt. We talked about missed tackles force, how elusive he is. He ranked tied at second with 82 missed tackles force, 5.6 yards per carry, 17 touchdowns, 1,399 yards, 969 of those came after contact. And hey, he's actually a pretty good receiving option as well. Is this we had this thing on Shoot the Gap during the season. We had this segment called Money or Mirage. Is what we're seeing here out of him money, or is this a mirage? And Drew, let's put you on the spot. Is he a money or mirage fantasy worthy running back for you this year?
Money. Worth all the hype. I'm not usually a running back, like draft running back in the first round type of guy from an NFL standpoint, but I think that he is fully deserving of being taken in the first round of the NFL draft, and I think he will be. And that's really the last missing piece from his profile. Obviously, we didn't get the testing numbers at the combine, which would have been great. But I mean, he's a little bit shorter, but he's got good size, though. He's an early declare like we like to see. He had the early production. He had almost 2,000 total yards by his second year in college. His career yards per carry is 6.5. His career yard per reception is over 11. And his yards per route run is 1.76 for his college career. So it's just across the board. I know he didn't catch the ball a ton last year, but I think the previous year, I think he was like the leading receiver among running backs. So he really can do whatever your offense needs him to do. To me, in my mind, at least since I've been playing fantasy football, and especially since I've been paying attention to Dynasty, I think from a rookie prospect standpoint, like just looking at not factoring in what they've done in the NFL, but just looking at where they were as college prospects, I think it's Saquon, it's Bijan, and it's Ginty. Like I think he is in. I know people don't like the word generational, so I won't use that, but I think he is in that stratosphere of running back prospects. So I think he's worth every bit. I'm taking him. I don't care if it's super flex, one quarterback, whatever. I'm taking him 101.
You mentioned the receiving yardage. You go back to 2023, only 286 on 24 receptions. Last year, coincidentally enough, had 468 yards, and that puts him at the RB2 in receiving yards, which that blows my mind. I thought that he was not going to be as good of a receiver in terms of volume, but he had 20 targets, 35 yards per route run, number 2 amongst all these running backs. And I'm talking about running backs in the entire NCAA who are draft eligible for 2025. I'm not filtering by Power 5 or Power 6, however you want to call it, just yet. So the fact that even against these smaller schools that put up ridiculous stats because the lack of competition, he is still, the cream rises to the top here. JT, what are your thoughts here on Cam?
Are we talking about Cam or are we talking about Ash and GT?
Cam,
okay. I was going to say, you're throwing me off for a second there. Dude, I actually like Cam. I tell you what, I've been up and down on him a little bit. I was like, man, I really liked him when I watched him play.
We're supposed to be talking about Cam Scatterbull that whole time.
that's the only reason I asked, because I was like,
I thought that was all a joke. I talked about Jorge the whole time.
I know. That's why I brought it up, because I was like, Drew just talked about Ashton GT that whole time, and then Jorge started throwing out numbers, and I was like, those are Cam Scatterbull's numbers, not Ashton GT's numbers.
Why didn't you stop me earlier? I thought that was a joke.
No. That's the whole point. The point was to start off with the bang.
Oh my gosh!
We're definitely going to cut that up and replay that of Drew talking about Cam Scatterbull that way. That's fantastic.
Let's talk about that.
No, you're fine. So no, we'll talk about Cam. So I like Cam a lot. I think he's a hard runner. I mean, obviously that Texas game put him on the map in the playoffs. He was just an animal. Played fantastic in that one. I've had a hard time finding a good comp that I like for him. I really don't know who I like that I think he feels like. To me, I think there's going to be some NFL teams that really like him. If he was in last year's draft class, I think he's clear cut top 5 in last year's draft class. This one's going to be interesting to see how people like him because of just how deep this class is. And not only is it deep, but you have a variety of skill levels, of types that you want. So if you want a bigger back, you can get a bigger back. If you want a smaller scat back, you can get a scat back. If you want a guy that has a good receiving profile, then you have that. If you want a super fast guy, there's those guys in this draft. So I think it's a crossover so much. So I think it's really going to depend on what teams specifically want. I think Cam has a really nice profile of a guy that can do a little bit of everything for your team. I really do. I think he's solid. The 40 time, he didn't run it at the combine. Now,
I think that
part of that was
accidental.
Part of it was
I think he knew he wasn't going to test well. It was like, because he did the vertical jump and everything like that. He just didn't run the 40.
So here's what it reminded me of, Drew, was last year with Braylon Allen. Braylon Allen knew his 40 time was going to suck. Point. He knew it was going to suck.
Yeah, so
he just didn't do the 40 time.
Right.
And to me, Cam is a smaller Braylon Allen who's a little bit better at everything than Braylon Allen is. A better receiver, a little bit better at breaking tackles. And we saw Braylon Allen was pretty good as a backup last year for the Jets. Now he fell in the draft. He didn't go till late 4th round. When a lot of people really were expecting to go higher. I think people are going to be higher on Cam than him. I think he goes 3rd round, honestly, in the NFL draft. Depending where he lands is going to be a big factor on how high I am on him in fantasy drafts. Right now, if I had to take him, I'd take him probably mid to late 2nd in a fantasy draft because I do think he can do everything. If he ends up running a 40 time, which at this point I'm going to kind of be shocked even if he runs the 40 at his pro day. I don't even think he will. But I think he's probably in the 4.6 range as long as it's not 4.7. I mean, even if he's like 4.62, I don't think that's terrible, honestly, for the type of player he is, because we've seen him be able to break tackles. We've seen what he can do catching the ball. I'm not expecting huge long runs from him anyway with the type of player he is. No. That's just not his game. So that's not where you're at. You're not expecting that. So why does it matter? He does great on cutbacks. He reads the lanes well. We've seen him. He's just a dog. He gets out there and the guy just fights and just keeps fighting and keeps fighting. 5'10", about 220, I think is solid. I tell you what, the athleticism, though, was impressive. The 40 time didn't do it, but man, the fact that he basically almost jumped a 40 vert, pretty good. That shows you have to have some type of athleticism to get a 40-inch vertical jump. So to me, that helps, showing that he's not just all bulk. He does have, some other things he can do. He had a solid broad jump. So I think he's a really good rusher. I think he can break tackles. I think he's a fairly good receiver. Blocking is, but I feel like the blocking he needs to improve on. But I feel like that's everybody we talk about as running backs going in the NFL. Yeah, it's just what it is. What it is. But to me, he is right in that. He's right in that mid-second tier of RBs in this draft class to me, and I feel like there's a big group there. And I feel like those guys could go all over the place depending on where they get drafted and who takes them.
Yeah. So now that I know this isn't a bit, because I knew that you said you were going to start the show off.
Well, as soon as you said Barkley
you said you were going to start the show off with a joke.
I was like, oh, he really loves Cam. I was like, I do like Cam all right, but I was like, whoa.
No, I mean, Jorge gave us a heads up before the show. He was going to start off on some nonsense, but I just thought it was going to be a bit, and then we were just going to go in and start talking about the real number one running back. I didn't realize we were actually starting the show with Cam Scatabo, or Scatabo or whatever it is. But now that I understand that this is actually a thing, I mean, I pretty much echo what JT says. I have him as my RB8. He's kind of in a group of running backs that I have after what I consider to be a clear top 5. So he's in that next tier of players. Technically my third tier, I guess, because Genty, is in a tier by himself, but he's in that next group of players after what I think is the obvious top 5. He's my RB8. I understand why he didn't run the 40. If I was him, I would not have either, but it makes it a little tougher because we don't have a 40 time. We don't have a speed score, but his burst score, with looking at his vertical numbers and everything like that, he ended up coming out at a 128.7, and you typically want the burst score to be 120 plus. So obviously knew he was going to test well there. It's not a coincidence that's the testing he ended up doing, but he's got good size. He had early production. His yards per carry, yards per reception, yards per route run, those numbers all look good across his college career. So he has a nice profile. He's going to be a fan favorite. I don't think it's out of the question that a team might draft him on day 2 just because they think that he might turn into one of those fan favorite guys and sell some tickets. After the Texas game,
if he gets drafted, Drew, right? He's gonna be one of the number 1 selling jerseys.
Yeah, and so team. If he's already a borderline day 2 pick, that might be enough to push him into day 2. Who knows? But I think that's going to be something really interesting to watch. Is number 1, where does he land? But even more importantly, what does the draft capital end up being? Because I've seen some people say day 2, I've seen some people say day 3, and that can make a lot of difference in terms of the opportunities that you get at the next level. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But yeah, I mean, outside of the long speed, there's a lot to like with Cam. And so he's not quite Saquon Barkley or Bijan Robinson, but I do think that he's a solid running back prospect in a really tough class. If he was in last year's class, he would have been probably around that RB3 range, probably. He would have been ahead of.
Would he have been ahead of Blake Corum for you? I've been
maybe I wasn't a Blake Corum guy, so it might have been easy.
See, I wasn't a Blake Corum guy either. I think he would have been 3 for me. I would have still had him behind
Benson, Jonathan Brooks. I would have had him behind Benson, and then it would have been kind of between like him
and then you get Corin, Wright, Lloyd, Davis. To me, he probably would have been
he's right in that mix. Yeah, he would have been right in that mix. Yeah. So, in this class, he's RB8. So it's just a rough year if you're not Ashton Genty. It's just a kind of a tough year to be a running back in this class.
All right, well, let's talk about Ashton Genty really quickly. Let's keep this thing going.
I already did that, so this should be nice and easy.
Well, I'll jump in on since Drew already gave his full blown analysis on GT.
Hold on a second, so we look at his yardage, and again, I'm pulling these from PFF, so thank you, PFF. 2,287 yards, 1,695 of those came after contact. 1,247 of those came on breakaway runs, which are runs that are designed to be 20 yards or more. Here's the thing. You mentioned, Drew, the receiving game was not exactly there. He had 28 targets, 18 receptions for only 102 yards. I could overlook that. And be like, okay, well,
just look at the year prior. It's easy to overlook.
I know.
Yeah, he had 43 catches for 569 yards and 5 touchdowns the year before. Yeah. I mean, he was one of the top receiving running backs in the nation the year before.
I totally get that. 0.5 yards per route run. Like, I guess they didn't need him to be out of the backfield and catching a lot because he was doing so much on the ground.
And it was a lot of screens when he did.
Yes. So I'm not saying this is like a huge negative that should make you have cause for concern here, but damn, that is not great. I want to also point out that PFF, they do a really good job of like creating like metrics and doing a good job of explaining what their metrics are, but then they have stuff that's just proprietary and they just tell you this is what it's called, go with it. So bear that in mind when I tell you this one. Their elusive rating, okay? Just how elusive they are. Just to give you an idea based off of numbers, okay? Ashton Janty's is 217.6. The next one is Kylan James at 193.5. And then it goes to 163 and then drops dramatically. That's scary. That is scary. I mean, you see the 101 in Superflex drafts here, Drew? Or you think a quarterback still needs to go at the top spot?
No, I still think he should be the 101. I mean, if Cam Ward ends up going 101 in the actual NFL draft, I think things are going to get a little bit tougher in Superflex leagues for some people. But for me, it's still Ginty. I'm taking him 101 regardless of format. And if your team's at a point to where like, hey, I'm gonna grab GT at the 101, my team sucks. Like I earned the 101 because of how bad my team is, and like I'm still a couple years away. Then try to trade the pick. I wouldn't pivot away from GT and take somebody else just because you feel like you need a different position other than running back. That's a valuable pick. Somebody will value that pick, will value the chance to get GT on the roster. So if you don't think that your team is going to be ready, then just trade the pick. But, if you're in a rebuild, I would tell you that drafting a running back as good as Ashton Zinti, that I think he'll probably be my running back 3 in Dynasty immediately as soon as he's drafted. I think that that's a player that you can rebuild around. So I don't think you necessarily have to dodge him just because you're in a rebuild either. I think he could be a guy that can kickstart your rebuild. So I'm taking him 101 regardless. But if you have any doubts about taking a running back at that point, if your roster's in shambles, then just look to move the pick. Don't take somebody else just because you think the position makes more sense.
Let's talk about somebody else who's also, grading out to be a very elite running back. The people over at NFL Mock Draft Database, Drew, last time we were on, we were talking about quarterbacks. You brought it up. It's a great website where they compile hundreds of mock drafts on the internet and give you like the totals there. Amarian Hampton, running back, North Carolina. Again, a lot of people are saying he's the second best running back in this class, behind Ashton Janty. JT, do you agree with that?
I have Amarian Hampton as my number 2. I've kind of gone back and forth between him and Travion Henderson, to be honest with you. Both those guys are right there. But after watching Amarian Hampton at the Combine, I think he solidified number 2 for me. I mean, the guy just absolutely put on a show. And every time we're always worrying about these guys, like, okay, hey, can he do it year to year? Or, oh, was he only good because his team was good? Mario Hampton's, he's a guy that answered those questions. Had a monster year with Drake May as his QB. Turns around, Drake May gets drafted. He has over 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns. Maybe 1,600 yards, 15 touchdowns. Turns around the next year, North Carolina's terrible. Terrible. They lost everybody. Quarterback play was bad. They lost their best wide receivers. Turns around, still 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns when everybody knew he's the best player on the team. So
still leads the ACC in rushing.
Still leads the ACC. To me, that's a buy. That's an absolute buy point because you're like, man, this guy, even with all that, he still was able to play well. PFF grade 92.3, 6 overall. His RAS score was through the roof, 9.93. Yeah, it was 9.61, and they readjusted with some other things. He's 9.93.
Oh, did they really?
Yep, they readjusted up to 9.93, which is just freaking phenomenal. Number 14 all time for a running back.
Wow.
2025, he was the number 1 RAS score for running backs. Number 1 with JT not being out there doing it. Just dude's got great size, 5'11", 220, ran a 4.46 40. 4.46 at
220.
221. That's crazy. And we've seen in real life that speed, and it wasn't a fake 4.4. He ran a 4.47, then a 4.46. So he ran 2 in a row at right the same speed. We've seen it on tape. He runs fast, he runs hard, he runs big. To me, he's elite. If it wasn't for JT, he'd be the number 1 back in this class. I love him. I think he's solidified himself as a first round pick. And I know we've all talked about, hey, it's a deep draft. Like, why would you spend first round draft capital on a running back? I think someone's going to grab him. I really do. Is it going to be Dallas at 12 if JT goes in the top 10? Is it going to be, the Broncos at 20 or the Steelers at 21? There's a ton of landing spots I see he goes. I'd be shocked if he gets out of the first round. Hampton's my number 2 in a 1 QB league. Depending on if I'm desperate on a wide receiver or not, I'm probably taking Hampton at 102 behind GT in a super flex league. He's in my top 5 in super flex. I think you got to take him in that top 5.
Yeah. I think you can make a strong argument at 104. But yeah, whenever you factor in his size to the 4.4640 he run, his speed score ends up coming out to 111.7, which was the second highest speed score in this class, and puts him in the 93rd percentile. So I'm a guy that big just isn't supposed to be able to move like that typically. So I agree. I think that I had Henderson as my RB2 pre-combine, and Henderson had a good combine too. Like, it's not like he tested poorly. It's just Hampton tested out of this world. And I agree, JT. I think that
you got a 4.43. You got 4.43 out of Henderson, which I thought he'd be fast. I thought he'd be slightly faster, but 4.43 is phenomenal. So I'm not talking trash about that. 4.43, but he barely eclipsed 200 pounds. You get a Hampton who's a clear 220 stud and ran a 4.46. And Hampton had way more production in college than Henderson. And I like Henderson a ton. I think he's going to be he's one of those guys I think is going to actually be a better pro than he was a college player as far as production wise. Yeah, but man, Hampton just feels like one of those guys. Hampton, to me, I don't think he's quite as good, but I see a Saquon Barkley type file possibly. I don't think he's quite as good as Barkley as far as everything else, but the athletic ability, everything I saw, I was like, man, could this guy be one of those players if he gets on the right team with a really good blocking offensive line? Could he put up a serious like 1,200 to 1,600 yard season multiple years in a row? I absolutely think he could.
Yeah, I've seen somebody compare him to your boy Jonathan Taylor, and I didn't really hate that
I do think that's I think he remind. I didn't want to say it because I always feel like I'm always like just comparing everyone to Colts players and Steelers players, but I do think he is a very Jonathan Taylor type player. I really, really do. I'm telling you, if I can get him, I'm gonna have Hampton in a lot of places, and if he ends up somehow, some way going to the Steelers at 21, I will be trading everyone to get him because everyone's gonna know I want him. So I'm gonna have to be trading up to get him.
Yeah, 100%.
It's crazy when you look at, we were talking about how there's so much depth at this running back class here. I have never seen such impressive stats jump off of the page than I've ever seen before at the running back position in all my years covering fantasy football. This is ridiculous. You look at Hampton, he had 1,660 yards. Over 1,200 of those came after contact. I mean, this is, you say he's a top 4 pick in Superflex rookie drafts, guys. Is that like a consensus there, or do you still think,
he is my 4th player on the dot?
That's what I've got. I've got him 142. To me, it's going to come down to if you're on a team where you're like absolutely desperate for wide receiver, which I've had a couple of those teams in the past where I loaded up at running back and I've got like CMC and I've got like JT and I've got, Najee and I've got some, pretty deep running back group, but I had some injuries and maybe I didn't play as well. In those situations, am I maybe going to go wide receiver at 104 instead? Probably. But if it came down to I'm pretty equal at wide receiver, running back, I think I'm going Hampton. If I don't definitely need wide receiver or quarterback, Hampton is my guy behind Genty.
I'll probably, if Hampton gets first round draft capital, I'll probably end up taking him over Ted McMillan, and it'll be right there with Cam Ward for like the 103, 102, 103 range. If he gets first round draft capital, at that point, it'll be a whole nother ballgame. If he gets second round draft capital, I might end up taking Cam Ward and Ted McMillan, assuming Ted is the first receiver off the board like we're expecting. And then he'll slot into that 104. But if he gets first round draft capital, he could even climb a little bit more.
No, I love that.
Yeah, especially if he goes first round and ends up on a pretty good team with a good offensive line, and he can step in and play right away. Before Najee got signed by the Chargers, I was thinking, man, the
that
Chargers
was the spot,
would be a prime landing spot for him. You would just absolutely
Yeah.
love that landing spot. Like I said, if he ends up going to the Steelers, I love Jalen Warren. I don't think he's a RB1 for your team. I think he's good as the second man. If he went to the Steelers at number 21 after the trade for DK, where everybody thought they were going to Mecca Ibuka, maybe they don't go wide out in the first round now. If Hampton went to the Steelers, I would be pretty stoked about him, and I would definitely take him top 5 because I think he would be clear cut their number 1 guy. And why I like Najee, and I think he's insanely underrated. I think Hampton is a lot better of a player than Najee.
Let's talk about another good player here in the college draft class here for the running back position. Somebody, again, checking all these boxes in terms of just being really, borderline elite at everything they're doing. Caleb Johnson, Iowa, you had 1,535 yards, 21 touchdowns, 0 fumbles, 1,060 yards after contact, 4.42 yards per attempt after contact. I mean, I'm rattling off these 3 running backs, and outside of Cam Ward, for me, I can envision a scenario realistically, not just like, in dream world, realistically, where in some dynasty leagues out there, outside of like Cam Ward, and, Emeka and maybe even Luther Burden, the rest of the first round potentially could be, at least pre-NFL draft, running back heavy. And then depending on landing spot and which one has the best pathway to snaps, then you'll see more filtering out of that scenario where you have more running backs going in the first round. But it just feels like there's just so much talent. And the question is you as a fantasy manager, and Drew, we'll start with you, as you as a fantasy manager, pre-NFL draft, you're having your rookie draft right now. Are you just like greedy? Like, I want all the running backs. I want to draft all the running backs. I want to get them I don't care about value. I don't care about where I'm getting them. I want to get them as quickly as possible. Or are you going to be the fantasy manager that's more reserved? That's like, you know what? I know I can find a running back in the second round. I know I can find multiple running backs in the second round and third rounds. I'm okay pacing myself.
It's tough. It depends on the league, depends on the league settings, what your team build looks like, things along those lines. Sure. I'll just say in general, just to kind of, I guess, put an emphasis on how good this running back class is. I would say in general, I want a piece of this running back class. My top 5 running backs in this class, all 5 of them would have been the running back 1 for me pre-draft in last year's class. You have to get to my running back 6 before you start factoring in Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson. Like I know Bucky Irving's the clear RB1 of last year's class now, but thinking back to where I had them this time last year based on their prospect profiles, all 5 of my top 5 would have been the RB1 in last year's class. Like that, this class is legitimately that good. And then whenever you get into the deeper rounds of your rookie drafts, like once you get into the, the third, the fourth round, if you're trying to decide between a running back and a receiver or a running back and tight end, this is the class where just take the running back. The running back class is so good that I just want to take as many shots and as many gambles on this running back class as I can. That's a very general, broad statement. If for some reason Ted McMillan had fallen to like the 109 or 110, and I'm deciding between him and Caleb Johnson, as much as I like Caleb Johnson, at that point I'm taking Ted McMillan. So everything is dependent on what's going on in your league and things like that. But just in general, I want to try to get as many pieces of this running back class as I can, because I think that I think those top end guys, the top 4 or 5 players, are really special in their own right. And then I think this class has a lot of depth as well. That the NFL draft is going to help us shake a lot of that out in terms of which guys we need to pay more attention to, which guys we need to value. But if for some reason you were drafting ahead of the NFL draft, yeah, I'm rolling the dice on as many running backs as I can.
So for just to clarify, if you are a dynasty manager who's hurting at the position and you have the 104 or 105 pick in a super flex rookie draft, packaging that pick to move back and get more second or thirds just so you can stockpile the running back position, you would be on board with in terms of co-signing for advice?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important whether you use your own rankings or use somebody else's. I think whenever you're trying to decide if you want to trade back or not, I think it's very important to develop tiers in your rankings to try to find pockets where you can trade in and trade out of. Like if there's a clear tier break for me and there's one guy left that I really want, then maybe I'll be less likely to trade out. But if a tier break just happened and now there's 9 guys on the board that I'm comfortable with, and I can collect more picks that is going to give me more opportunities to take more shots on this class, then yeah, in a heartbeat, I'll trade back to get those, extra lottery tickets. But that's why I think that developing tiers, whether it's using your own rankings or downloading somebody else's and then creating tiers within those, I think that that's really important to try to help keep yourself, I guess, disciplined during the draft, to try to make it, is it really a smart idea to trade out of this pick, or is this, is there a tier drop? Is there a drop in production or things like that if I move away from this player? So that would be the number one thing I would tell folks to do before their draft, and then use that to help you decide when it would be smart to trade down or not.
All right, let's get to our next running back here. And JT, you mentioned him earlier in terms of deciding who's going to be your 2 at the running back position. Travion Henderson, Ohio State. JT, tell managers why they should be very happy if he is one of their top picks here in the rookie drafts.
Yeah, so he's a guy. Him and Hampton I was back and forth on who was my 2 and who was my 3 in this draft class. Hampton sold me at the combine. I already liked him a ton. The athleticism, what I saw out of him, the 40 time, it translated what I saw on film. So he's my number 2 now. Henderson's my 3. And the only reason he is I think Hampton can get more touches per game. Now, What I love about Henderson is he doesn't need as many touches to be productive. He can do a lot with the few touches he's going to get. He's a guy, I think, if he gets 15, 16 touches a game between running and receiving, I think he's going to be very, very good for you fantasy-wise. We saw it in the playoffs. If you watch him, I mean, he was an elite producer as a freshman at Ohio State. If you were in any kind of Devy league, everyone was taking Travion Henderson after his freshman year at Ohio State. I mean, he was getting bought up immediately really high in Devy drafts because everybody was loving him. He's dealt with a few injuries. He's a guy everyone wanted, like Drew said, everyone wanted him to come out last year because he would have been RB1 hands down. It wouldn't even have been a discussion. He would have been RB1 by a mile over anyone else if he came out last year. So thinking in that context, him as RB3 for this class, you're kind of getting a steal because he would have been RB1 easily last year. And where Benson and Brooks went, he would have went easily 3-4 picks ahead of those guys in rookie drafts for sure. So I like Henderson. I like what I'm getting. The offense he ends up in, I honestly think he can be successful anywhere because of his receiving profile. I think he can work anywhere. If you get him on say the Bears, where they can make him into a Jahmyr Gibbs type of player, Ben Johnson can use that offense, man, people are going to lose their mind. You get him, I saw a mock the other day, somebody had him going to the Chiefs at the end of the first round. People will lose their freaking mind if he goes to the Chiefs. He's going to go high. I mean, real high if he ends up being drafted in the first round by the Chiefs. And I will say this is not a Clyde Edwards-Helaire situation where the Chiefs take him in the first round, he jumps up, people take him only because he's on the Chiefs. People are going to be like, oh, crap, I already loved him. and now he's going to the Chiefs, it's going to be a smash. So I love him. The receiving profile is great. He doesn't need 20 carries a game to give you points. He can bust out big plays. I was excited that he at least hit 200. I mean, we're kind of usually at that threshold, like, oh, is he under 200? We saw Bucky Irving be good last year, not being at 200, but him being right around 200 is solid for me. He's a guy, he looks bigger than that, though. He's stocky. He's kind of a stocky guy. Yeah. So I like it. I'm not worried about that at all. He split time at Ohio State this last year with another top guy that we'll talk about here shortly, but he still put up 1,000 yards rushing, 7.1 a carry, 7.1 yards a carry. Phenomenal. Also added 27 catches for 284 yards, 10 touchdowns on the ground. Again, a guy who didn't even play most games all the way because they were smoking people. 4.43 is good for me. I like the time. That 1.52 in the 10-yard split, phenomenal. Anything around 1.5, 1.51, 1.52 is absolutely phenomenal. 1.52, absolutely loved it. He also showed he's athletic. Vert, 38.5, broad jump was fantastic as well. I like him, man. I really do. I think he can sneak into the end of the first round, but even if he doesn't, there's no way he gets 10 picks into the second round. I don't think someone's going to be all over him. I think the Steelers would be all over him in the second round if he doesn't go in the first round. I think Tennessee would love him. I think the Browns would love him. Everyone picking at the top of the second round, I think would be all in on him. So I think he ends up possibly going first round, but even if he does drop the second, to be honest with you, that doesn't affect me. I'm going to like him anyway. I think he's a player that can work in any system where there's a few guys in this draft that I feel like they got to be in the right system on the right team to really hit fantasy wise. I don't feel that way with Henderson. I think he's going to be fantasy gold.
Yeah, I agree completely, man. You love the big playability. You love the pass catching upside. He had the early production. He went over 1,500 yards in his first year in college. Career yards per carry over 6, career yards per reception over 10. The 40 times there, the speed scores there, the burst scores there. Like, there's really not much to like about his profile. He's not an early declare like you'd like to see. Like he would have been early declare if he would have came out last year. But with NIL being a part of college football now, I think we're going to have to stop caring about that as much at the running back position, with how much running backs can get paid to stay in college versus how much running backs might be getting paid on a rookie contract. There might not be as much incentive for them to go into the NFL early anymore. So while that used to be a big deal for me at the running back position, I think it's going to have to be something we're going to have to pay a little bit more attention to in terms of it not mattering as much. And so that was really like one of the only blemishes. And I don't really
Drew,
consider it a blemish anymore.
Yeah, Drew, and I think like to say what you're saying, jump on that. It's not like he couldn't have been an early declare. He absolutely could have been a high draft pick.
Yeah,
he just chose
he
to stay in school, which I think is a big difference. When a guy's like, no, I'm choosing to stay, but like I'm gonna be a high draft pick, but I was like, no, I want to stay in school another year and keep going. And he made pretty good money. To me, there's a big difference between a guy who didn't early declare because he got bad feedback, was like, dude, you're not gonna get taken very high. Right. I think, the fact that he would have been taken high the last 2 years if he came out. I mean, even his sophomore year, he had injuries, but if he could have came out after his sophomore year, I still think he would have been a second or third round pick. So that to me, like, I agree with you. I don't think that's going to matter as much as it has in the past.
You guys mentioned, both of you, his running mate in today's episode. Is it pronounced Quinshawn Judkins?
Quinshawn Judkins. Yep, Quinshawn.
I can read. You look at the yardage from last year, very comparable. Judkins actually had more touchdowns than fumbles. Both of them yards after contact, the comparable numbers there. Yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles forced. The only thing I'm seeing as a downside, in terms of Judkins here, is that you mentioned one of the highlights of Travion Henderson is that he does need a lot of touches. He has that big play breakaway percentage. Judkins is kind of on the lower end, RB30, running backs in all of college football and breakaway run percentage. Aside from that, though, is he the type of running back that you can consider to be, top? I guess I shouldn't say, where in your rounds, in rookie drafts he's going to go, because obviously, like Drew, you mentioned, there are so many factors that you take into consideration. But that being said, is he what you would consider a value, or should you be proud to say, like, no, he's my top running back that I got in my rookie draft this year, Drew?
No, I mean, if he's the running back you come away with, I think you should still be very excited about that. He doesn't offer the receiving profile that GT, Hampton, Henderson offer. He's more of a 2-down guy than a 3-down guy. It's not that he can't catch the ball, but it just his career receiving numbers don't look great necessarily. His yards per reception for his career was 7.2, and then his yards per route run was 0.73. It was under 1. So it's just not a lot to love there from a receiving profile. But I think he could be a force in the early downs, a force in whenever you get into the money area. I think he has a lot of touchdown upside. Touchdowns are really hard to predict, but I think that he has a lot of touchdown upside. Like, I think that, I think he can be a David Montgomery plus, or like a Nick Chubb on the high end, like one of those guys to where, like, hey, they might not catch passes, but they're still very valuable for fantasy. So that's kind of more so where I see him at. He's below Henderson and Hampton because of the lack of receiving upside, but he still tested extremely well. 4.48. His speed score was 109.7 because of how well he ran the 40 at his size. Burst score of 131.5. So all of those are above the threshold you'd like to see him be at. So everything as far as combine testing came out really well for him. So I think that he's going to be right there in that mix of that next set of running backs, Hampton, Judkins, Henderson. I think he's right there with those guys. So if you leave with Judkins out of your rookie draft, I think you should be pumped about it.
Yeah, I mean, I love Judkins. He's my RB4 right behind Henderson. I think the David Montgomery comp is right on. I was a big Monty guy coming in. I think he's got the contact balance like Monty. He runs low to the ground. He's a touchdown machine. I mean, if you go back and look at his college stats, he's playing on some really good offenses, so that helps. But 1,500 yards as a freshman, as a 3-star at Ole Miss, wasn't super highly recruited. 1,500 yards, 16 touchdowns. Then 1,100 in his second year with not as good of a team, still got 15 touchdowns. Had 1,000 yards this year he had almost 80 less carries, still got 14 touchdowns, 15 catches for 132, 22 for 149, 22 for 161. So he's not a receiving machine, but he's got a profile. It's not like he can't catch the ball. And of course, he didn't need to with Travion there and some other guys. I think Monty's a great comp for him. His landing spot's going to be real interesting. I think he's a second, third rounder. Even if he drops to the third, if he ends up in a nice spot, I'm going to be all over him. He would be a guy I'd absolutely be eyeing at the end of my first round, top of my second round, if I can get him that late. If I got him in like 2-1, 2-2, I would probably lose my mind. I'd be super pumped about it. I mean, like, if he fell that far in a draft, I would just love it. I think he's a guy, like, what do you think, Drew? 109-ish to 112, 1.8 to 112, somewhere in there?
I've got him in my 108 right now in Superflex. Yeah. I think he should be firmly in the middle of the first round. We'll see how the receivers shake out. There's been a lot of, Luther Burden possibly slipping to the second, stuff like that.
I was going to say, that's where I've been. I'm like a Burden Judkins at 108. That's kind of where I've been in drafts. I'm either taking Burden or I'm taking Judkins at 108. I love Judkins. He's another one, like, say the Steelers went defensive tackle first round and they got Judkins in like the second. He's right in the top for me. I mean, that's a perfect landing spot for him. He's another guy.
He's like a souped up Najee. Like,
yeah, exactly. So he's another guy that I felt like with Hampton absolutely won at the combine. Absolutely won because there was a couple questions about, like, okay, they're kind of bigger, but are they actually 220? How fast are they actually? The fact that he clocked in at 221 right with Hampton, 5'11". They're literally almost the identical size. They're both just a little over 5'11", both 221. The fact that he ran a 4.48 at the combine, I thought was masterful. I was hoping, honestly, he was going to run better than a 4.52. In all honesty, I was like, oh, if he could be like low 4.5s, I still love it. The fact that he ran 4.48, I thought was phenomenal. Vertical 38.5, broad jump 11, which is phenomenal. Anything over 10 is good. 11 is phenomenal. His 10-yard split was very, very good as well. He was faster than people. People are like, oh, is he just the hammer? No, he showed he's got speed, and he showed it really his freshman year at Ole Miss. He didn't get as many breakout runs at Ohio State this last year, but man, he had some big ones his freshman year at Ole Miss. If you go back and watch, Judkins sold me. He's another guy. I'm like, I knew I already liked him. Now I definitely am in on him. I want him. If I miss on those top 3 guys, and I'm like, oh, my team's good, I don't have a top 6 pick. If I made it to the playoffs and I get Judkins at 108, 109, 110, I'm going to be pumped that I got him as a playoff team.
Let's switch it up a little bit and go, further down, probably where a lot of you have him ranked in your rookie rankings for running back. But somebody that I've been seeing on X and on Blue Sky and wherever you go for your social media, this name kind of just starting to pop up more and more and more. And I think even Drew, I think you mentioned him or tweeted something about him in the recent months out of Virginia Tech, Bashul Tutin. 11 yards, 15 touchdowns, 4 fumbles, has a little case of the drops. But when you look at the efficiency, number 4 in yards after contact per attempt, has a high breakaway run rate, missed tackles forced. I mean, this guy is like a big play waiting to happen, and definitely somebody from, looking at it from a numbers perspective, like he could be like, somebody that is a late round gem just because of how explosive he is and the big play abilities, and especially for those who are playing in best ball leagues, not necessarily for like a dynasty or a redraft season, but like in a best ball situation, maybe taking him, hoping he gets you that home run threat. But that's as far as I see him being of value for fantasy football. Can you sell me or sell people out there why he would be a good dynasty asset for you?
I think he might have tested well enough at the combine to work himself into day 2 of the NFL draft and get the draft capital that we need to possibly, feel better about the opportunities he could get at the NFL level. He ran a 4.32 best among running backs. He came out with a 118.3 speed score. So whenever you take that 40 and adjust it based on time, or adjusted based on his weight, still the highest speed score in the class, 133.9 burst score, which again, I believe best among running backs. Like he tested out of his freaking mind. And then on top of that, he has the size that you want. His BMI is at 30, which is solid. He has the early career production. He was over 1,700 yards by his second year. His career yards per carry just under 6 at 5.9. He's got a career yards per reception at 10, and then his yards per route run 1.26. Not great, but not terrible by any means. He's got the full profile, man. But so I think that the testing numbers are really really what it was. But yeah, I put out a tweet back February 6, 2025, I said that he could be one of my favorite later round picks in the rookie class because of the early production. He had a 36.3% career broken tackle rate as well. He's got a lot of stuff that you look for with a running back. Now at this point, he's kind of done everything that he can. It's just a matter of finding out where the NFL values him. And right now I've got him as my, I think running back 9, if I remember correctly. But I've got him as my running back 10. And so, that's over popular guys like David Martinez, DJ Giddens, Dylan Sampson, just to name a few names that most people probably have, or at least maybe pre-combine they had him over him. I'm not sure post-combine how people are feeling now, but yeah, he tested well. He put himself on the map, and so now it's just a matter of waiting to see what the NFL draft tells us. But I'm really excited for him.
Jamie in the chat here, my guys. Welcome, Jamie. Is this still Shoot the Gap? Nope, this is Dynasty.
The marathon's over.
Marathon for IDP is over for
We're talking offense for once. JT and Jorge talking offense for once. Jamie, we're talking RBs, baby.
JT, anything you want to?
I was gonna say, yeah, for me on Tootin, I had him in some C2C leagues. He had some monster games this year, including a season best game against Boston College, where he had 18 carries for 266 yards and 4 touchdowns. Had a monster game. Really solid player, for a former North Carolina A&T guy before he transferred to Virginia Tech. I like him a lot. I think it was a clear 5th, 6th round pick until the combine, and then he's smoked. I think he's moved way up. I tell you who, before I saw him at the combine and saw him just absolutely light it up, he reminded me, and I know this is going to sound crazy that I'm comparing him to a Steeler, but he kind of reminded me of Fast Willie Parker. Like, he kind of was like, a guy that like had a okay college career. Willie Parker, underrated, didn't really have a great college career. Tootin's had a much better college career than he had, but a guy that's just got wheels, is underrated, a little undersized, but can be a solid guy. Like Jorge, like you said, best ball. I'm loving him for best ball. Can he carve out a more full-time role in the NFL? That's my worry. I love
get better as a blocker to be on.
Yeah, he's got to improve some things. He dealt with some injuries. He's got super high upside. My worry is with him is you're going to get some great games and you're going to get some duds. Like, you're just going to have games where he disappears.
That's fair.
And then you're going to have a game where he goes for 150 and 2 touches, and you're like, bam, I'm all in on Tootin again. And then the next week he has 5 carries for 14 yards, and you're like, oh my God. I that's what I'm worried about with him. I love what he did at the combine. He was outside my top 10 in this class for sure. I've got to re-rank him after the combine of where I like him. I still think he's outside my top 10, but that's only because there's some guys I really, really like. I just really like a lot of guys in the class. But if he ends up going in the 3rd round, I think we got to pay attention. I mean, my comp for him right now, outside of Willie Parker for the old school guys, if I'm comping him to someone in the league right now, I'm probably saying Isaiah Pacheco is he's in that realm. He's a super fast guy. I've never been a huge Pacheco guy, which is kind of why I'm like, I don't know how much I love Tootin at the next level. There's other guys I'm probably taking over him just because there's other guys I like more. But I could see where people are fired up about him. And depending on where he lands, I could see him moving up draft boards. Right now, he's outside my top 10. But if he fell far enough in drafts, I would not hesitate to take him.
Very nice. Very nice. Let's keep this train rolling. You mentioned his name, Drew Dylan Sampson, per PFF, the 5th best rated running back amongst the 2025 draft eligible running backs. 22 touchdowns last year, 4 fumbles out of the University of Tennessee. Over 1,480 yards, 3.6 yards after contact per attempt. When it comes to missed tackles forced, he was number 5 overall amongst all running backs. I mean, it's at this point, I feel like when we're talking about some of these running backs that we'll start getting into now, like Sampson and Neal, things are starting to blur together in terms of take your pick. Would that be a fair assessment here of Dylan Sampson? He's like one of those, like the next, tier down from the Janties, from the Hamptons, from the Hendersons and Judkins and Caleb Johnson. Are we getting to that next tier down? Like, where do you have him ranked, Dylan Sampson, for you?
So I'm lower than consensus on Dylan Sampson. I've got him down as my running back 13. Looking at if I compare him to running backs against the expert consensus, I have him 5 spots lower at the running back position compared to the expert consensus ranking. So he's a guy that I'm definitely lower on. The size isn't great. He didn't hit over 1,000 total yards until his third year, which he was playing. He was playing behind some other guys that got drafted, like Jalen Wright, most recently. But his career yards per carry 5.8, underneath that 6 mark. His career yards per reception 8.6, pretty comfortably under that 10 mark that I look for. His yards per route run 1.11, below that 1.50 mark that I look for. Unless I missed it, I don't think he tested as far as the 40 and stuff goes, which I thought was weird for a guy that, is kind of like, I think that one of his calling cards is that he's a faster guy. So I thought it was weird that he didn't test on that. He did test as far as his, I can't find it now. I know his burst score came out pretty well. I can't find it now, but 121.5. So over that 120 threshold that we look for. So that looks out well. But just as far as that next tier of running backs, it's honestly one of my least favorite. So I might be a bad guy to talk to about that. But maybe that's just some sting from being burned by Tennessee guys in the past. I don't know. I try to scout the player, not the helmet, but sometimes it can be kind of hard to separate the two. But that next tier running backs, he's honestly one of the ones that I'm lower on compared to most. So I don't know, JT, maybe you feel differently.
I have to be honest with you. I'm in lockstep with you here on Dylan Sampson. He's outside of my top 10. I don't like him as much as everybody else likes him either. To me,
makes me feel
I
better.
didn't love Jalen Wright last year, and I feel like I didn't either. I know they went to the same school, but I feel like he's Jalen Wright all over again. That's a team that really spreads things out. If you have speed, it works at the college level. I just don't know if that translates to the NFL. He's right around 200. I think he's maybe not really 200, to be honest.
I think that might be why he didn't run. I think he beefed up to hit the weight limit.
I agree. I 100% agree with you.
Now I can't test it this weight because I'm not going to be as fast as I was in college.
And I think a lot of people have talked about that 200 weight mark, and I think he beefed up to 200 number to get there, because I really think he looks like a guy who's naturally like 185 to 190, to be honest with you. Yeah. He's a track guy. He's got elite track speed. I think if he's like training and only going to run and no one looks at his weight, no one looks at anything else, he's a 4.3 guy. He's a 4.35 guy. He's fast as shit. He really is. But I don't love him as a running back. He had a really nice year. I had him on a lot of C2C leagues. He crushed it for me as far as that's concerned. I just don't think he can pass block in the NFL. I'm a little worried about his receiving profile. I think the guy's really athletic, but to me, he's more in the Tootin range, and I almost would rather take a shot on Tootin like slightly later in a draft than I would at Sampson. Now, that might change when the real draft happens and Tootin jumps over, Sampson in drafts. But right now, if I was mocking, Tootin's behind Sampson, I would rather wait and take Tootin personally. I'm just not a huge Sampson guy. I mean, I know I keep watching him. I'm like, everybody else loves him. I must be off. And I just, every time I look at it, I'm just like, man, I just don't love it. I see Jalen Wright 2.0. I mean, he's going to have to end up in a perfect spot where a team that can create big gaps and he can just sprint to the end zone. To me, that's how he works in the NFL.
So in other words, the newest Miami Dolphin again, because that's all they seem to do.
I can see them taking him again, but yeah,
they got rid of Mostert, so they need another running back.
Yep, it's perfect. Yep, I can see them taking him, pop him in there. They got Wright, they got A-Chain, they got him, they got 3 of the same guy. Exactly.
All right, well, let's talk about another running back here that has been fairly consistent in the past couple of years. RJ Harvey, University of Central Florida, this past year. 1,578 yards, 22 touchdowns, 2 fumbles, 69 missed tackles for. So again, in the top 10 of that department. You go back to his 2023 stats, over 1,300 yards, 16 touchdowns, 3.51 yards after contact per attempt, 64 missed tackles for. This is what's up. I like seeing consistency. This screams to me a running back that I feel safe with. You know what I mean? Like there are times where you have players and all. It's every position in fantasy football where they have, we were talking about a linebacker from UCLA at 8 o'clock earlier. Like he had one really good year, and then we're hoping that he's going to we're banking on that production carrying over to the next level. Whereas this is a situation where I know that Harvey is pretty consistent as they come. What are your thoughts on RJ Harvey there, Drew?
He's one of my favorite of like this second, third tier of running backs, however we want to look at it, the guys after the top 5. He's one of my favorites. He's got a great profile. He's got really good size. It wasn't against great competition, but he has the early production. He went over 1,000 total yards by his second year in college. He's got a yards per carry over 6, yards per reception at 12.3. His yards per route run at 1.45. He tested really well at the combine, ran a 4.4 that came out to a speed score of 109.4, burst score of 128.1. All of those are over the threshold where you want him to be. Like his testing numbers were nothing that scared you, anything like that. Ashton Jeanty was the only one that had more carries of 15 plus yards last year. The dude catches everything. He can rip off big plays. He's a route runner. Some might call him undersized because he's only like 5'9", but he's a beefy 5'9". He can handle a good sized workload. I like RJ Harvey a lot, man. There's only one running back that I haven't, like we talked about we've already talked about the top 5, those big guys. There's only one other guy outside of that top 5 that we haven't talked about yet that I have in front of him. He's my running back 7 right now in this class. Ahead of the guy that we led even ahead of the guy we led the entire show off of with. And I'm not talking about Ashton Jeanty.
So Drew, I got a quick question for you. So if you did the measurables, him and Dylan Sampson were almost right next to each other. RJ Harvey's 5'8", 205. If you put those guys next to each other, RJ Harvey looks so much thicker and so much stronger than Dylan Simpson to me. It doesn't even look close, right?
200 pounds.
It was crazy because he's like an inch or two shorter, but Dylan Sampson was like 5 pounds lighter than RJ Harvey, and you looked at him next to you, you're like, no way. Without the pads on, you're like, no freaking way. RJ Harvey is smaller, but he's got a closer build to Ashton Jeanty at 5'8", 205, close. I think Jeanty ended weighing in at 211 or 212, and he's like just a little over 5'8", almost 5'9". So I think he's closer to him in size. Harvey is a guy that's kind of a late riser for me. I really liked what he did. And then he's another guy that at the combine absolutely helped himself running that, 4.40. The fact that he had the burners on, I think was real impressive. Like I said, he at 205 for him, he looks like 205, a ripped solid 205, as opposed to some of these other guys. You're like, that's kind of a fake 200 pounds. RJ Harvey looks like a solid, like, he has 3% body fat and he's 205, like legit. Right. So I like RJ Harvey. He's a guy that is definitely moving up my board. I originally had him outside my top 10. He's now inside my top 10. He's creeping up around 8, 9 for me. I really like him. I like what he did at UCF. I think teams are going to like him. I really do. I think he's moving up draft boards. I honestly wouldn't be shocked if he goes ahead of Tootin, even after Tootin had the just absolute unreal combine. Harvey was right there as far as impressiveness. I mean, I thought Harvey was really impressive what he did. I think Harvey could end up going in front of him. It's going to be, and I feel like we've said this constantly through the offseason. It's really going to matter where these guys get drafted, what round, and to what team specifically, because so many of these guys are close. I mean, they're hair difference in my ranking on a lot of these guys, especially after you get outside that top 5, 6, man, like 7 to 12, 14 to me is like real close on a lot of these guys. And it depends on like, do I want the speed guy or I want the bigger size guy? Do I want a guy a little more receiving profile or not? Like, because there's a variety of those guys in that area, but I'm definitely was late to the RJ Harvey bandwagon. I'm starting to jump on.
It's never too late to join. I'm with you though. I do think that there's a very interesting chunk of running backs that the NFL draft is going to help us sort out. Like my running back 6 through 10, they're in a tier together. My running backs 11 through 18, they're in a tier together right now. Like it's the reality is a large majority of these guys, they tested really well. They came in at really good size. Like Dylan Sampson was really the only one, like from a size standpoint, that was kind of a red flag. You know, like for the last couple of years, we've had like a short king kind of thing going on. You know, there's been a lot of smaller guys over the last few years. Like the year of the big bodied NFL back is back in this class. Like size wise, there's really not a lot to be concerned about. A lot of guys tested really well. A lot of guys have the early production and things like that. Like this is just, it's truly a really good class, man. And there's still a couple names that most folks will be familiar with, like Devin Neal and Ollie Gordon, that I don't even think we've talked about yet.
Well, yeah, I know we've talked about like how good of a deep of a class this is, but I think as we're getting farther and farther along, we're realizing like we're not just blowing smoke. This was the fastest running back class in the history of the combine. Fastest class ever, average wise speed. Ton of guys smoked. And then on top of that, like you said, Drew, really good size. We didn't have a ton of tiny guys like we've had in the past.
No.
Like everybody had really nice size, and even the bigger guys ran solid times for how big they were. And then a couple of the guys that we thought were going to be slower because they are bigger backs all lost a little weight and then actually had really good times, like really fast times. So like Rocket Sanders, a guy we probably won't talk about, but he was a guy that got slammed for being way overweight and killed himself because he was awesome as a sophomore in Arkansas, put on too much muscle weight, slowed way down, got injured. He dropped like 15 pounds. And then he ran a sub 4.40
too.
Well, he ended up getting in the 4.4s. He ended up the second run. He got in the 4.4s. It was wild. I couldn't believe it. He got in the 4. I'm going to look it up right now. He got in the 4.4s and he was at 217, I think, at the combine. I couldn't believe when I saw him run that. I was like, oh my God. I was like, Rocket Sanders might be back. Because I was like, that is the guy that we saw sophomore year at Arkansas who absolutely tore it up and was like a Devi darling that everybody was all over. I'll see if I can find it, but like I know 4.49 and he ran 4.49 and a 4.47.
Wow, good for him.
Yeah. And this was a guy who was playing near 220 at Arkansas and then was all the way up to like 240 something. And just everybody was like, oh, this guy's off our board. He fell apart. And then South Carolina this year didn't have quite the production we wanted. But if he can say 217 to 220 and run in the 4.49s, hello, late round Hail Mary pick in fantasy drafts, I'll be all over. I know we weren't supposed to bring him up. I just got crazy. Sorry.
But that's one of those perfect type of examples, though, what I'm talking about. Like once you get into like the third round, the fourth round of your fantasy drafts, and you're deciding between Rocket Sanders or your favorite third round receiver, take the running back. The running backs, and once you get to the depth portion of the draft, the running backs are so much better. Just take the running back. And that's another perfect example of that.
You got Jamie in the chat. He started off G, and now he's working us down to X-rated. We will not throw it up on screen. Jamie, you are great. But we love you, Jamie.
We'll just keep that one in the chat. We'll just leave that in the chat for anybody who's reading the chat.
Yeah, if you want to see what he said, hop on over to YouTube and go look at the comments.
Exactly.
Drew, you mentioned two names, Devin Neal and Ollie Gordon. Let's round the show out just talking about those two guys, and then we'll get your both top five running backs pre-NFL draft. So let's start with Devin Neal. We talk about the big running backs. Well, let's 5'11", so not big, 215 per PFF, but model of consistency. 3 seasons over 1,000 yards, 2 seasons back-to-back years over 1,200 yards, 16 and 15 touchdowns in 2024 and 2023 respectively. The yards after contact per attempt seem to settle in right around 3.75. Missed tackles, he's elusive. He's very efficient. You look at the breakaway run percentage, I want to say is in the top 12 of qualified running backs. I mean, the guy, he makes plays. I wish the touchdown numbers were a little bit higher, but he is he screams playmaker to me. The elusiveness, though, is kind of tricky. You go back to 2022, 73 rating, then he had a really good year in 2023, then back down. What do you make of this? What do you make of Devin Neal here, JT? I know he's one of your favorite guys.
I love Devin Neal. I won't give you away my ranking on him yet because we'll save it for the end of the show. I'm a Devin Neal fan. I just love this guy. I liked him last year. If he would have came out last year, I know we've said it a couple times, he would have been right near the top of my RBs last year.
Yep.
If he came out, I think he's in the mix here. I brought this example up a couple other times on some other shows about him. To me, he did not have a great combine in just that he didn't. Everybody else blew everything away. Was his combine bad? No. But everybody else blew it out of the water. So he just looked so average. He is now the Bucky Irvin buy. So remember everybody last year after the combine, Bucky Irvin, everybody was out on Bucky because they saw the combine. He ran like a 4.54. He was undersized. People were like, oh, and I was one of those guys that absolutely melted down on Bucky because he was like my top 3. He was my 3rd guy. And then I kind of was like, oh, I think I have to be out on Bucky. He's small. He didn't run a fast time. And I just totally ignored all the tape I watched, all the film of him where I just was like, this guy's a baller. And I just kind of was like, oh, the combine sucked. And I got out on him. Huge mistake. Huge mistake. Devin Neal is that guy this year. He's going to drop because everyone's going to see everyone else ran a 4.42 or a 4.39. And he ran a 4.58. And people are like, oh, I don't want the guy that ran a 4.58. Oh, disgusting. Dude's nothing. He's just a baller, man. He's a player. He's productive. He can catch. He can run in any kind of system. You tell him what you need him to do, he'll do it. And he isn't a burner, but he's fast enough. He gets out of the gate quick. He's got good hands. The receiving profile is not as good as I think he actually is just because that's not what Kansas did. Still athletic, though. The speed was there, but broad jump, 10.4. 37.5 vert. So, again, it's not like this guy's just a terrible athlete. He's still a solid athlete. He's just not a burner. But you know what? I went in going, he's not going to burn. I know he wasn't because that's not who he is. I was like, if he run, I was hoping for like a 4.53 in all honesty. I was like, oh, if he runs like low 4.5s, I'm sold. Ran a 4.61, which everybody was like puking. And then he ran a 4.58. And I was like, okay, 4.58 I can live with. I can live with that. He was getting pushed to the early second round. Really pushed up the last couple weeks before the combine. Now I see him dropping late second to early third. I'm buying all day long at 2.8, 2.9, 2.10. All day long, I'm buying him at that. I just think he is a really good player. I think he can work in any system. If he's your RB2, he's going to be good. I think he has RB1 upside for a team. Just a really good player who does everything well. He does everything well. Obviously, pass blocking, like we talked about, not great. I think he has better hands than he's getting credit for. I think he breaks tackles very nicely. Outside of the Bucky Irving comp, he reminds me also of a better version of Tajay Spears. I think he's a better version of Tajay Spears. But I love the fact that I think he's going to be the Bucky Irving buy in fantasy this year. He's going to drop. Everybody's going to go after the studs that had the crazy combine, and he's going to be the guy that ends up being a better NFL player.
And I think this kind of just backs up your Bucky Irving comp because size and speed isn't everything. It's the motion in the ocean and on the field. And I think that we would all agree that Bucky Irvin's motion is very preferred. And so, if Devin Neal can replicate that, fantasy managers are going to be very happy. I've mentioned that I have like a very clear top 5. I think most folks do. I could be wrong, but I think there's a very clear top 5. Devin Neal, he's that next guy up for me. He's my running back 6. He's the only running back I have ahead of RJ Harvey that I was talking about earlier. I like him too. I like the production. The guy's just it feels so simplistic to say it, but he's just a flat out good football player. Like the guy just knows how to fucking play football, and there is a place for that at the NFL level. And I think he tested well enough to hold that draft capital. So as long as he sticks on day 2, he'll still be a guy that I'm excited.
Yeah, I think he's a 3rd round pick in the NFL. I think if he gets a good landing spot and he gets taken in the 3rd, I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to our last guy, and Erica Brown, one of our content creators here at Fantasy and Frames. She would definitely kick my ass if we did not talk about this last running back. Her being an Oklahoma State fan, talking, of course, about Ollie Gordon. Didn't have like the greatest year, this past year, but you go back to 2023, over 1,500 yards, 20 touchdowns, 924 yards after contact, 3.77 yards per attempt, yards after contact per attempt. A high breakaway run rate, percentage rather, of 57.2. Just to give you an idea of what that means, if that was this year, that would have been number 2 amongst the running back class in breakaway percentage. An explosive player, down year this year. Do you think that means for fantasy managers you can get him at a discount in rookie drafts this year, Drew?
I think it very well could mean that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he has a lot of the things that we look for. He's got decent size, not terrible. He's an early declare. He had over 2,000 yards by his 2nd year in college, which is just extremely solid. 5.6 career yards per carry. The receiving numbers aren't great, but the testing numbers they weren't awful either. He's a guy that I'm kind of in the middle with. Like like RJ Harvey, Bashal Tootin, those have kind of been like the next tier guys that I fall in love with. Ollie Gordon is a guy to where like I don't know how much of his decline is Ollie Gordon versus how much is just the offense in itself wasn't as good and the run blocking wasn't as good. And so he's one of the guys that I'm definitely waiting to see what the NFL has to say whenever it comes to an NFL draft. What kind of draft capital does he get? What does that investment look like? Because he could easily end up rising a few spots or he could drop. He's my running back 9 right now. He's sandwiched between RG Harvey and Tootin, my 2 loves. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I'm kind of in the middle about him right now. I don't hate him. I think I see the vision, but I'm not like over the moon about him either. So I'm just kind of waiting and seeing.
JT, what about you?
Yeah, so he's another one of those guys. If he could have came out, he couldn't because he was only a sophomore, got to be out of 3 years out of high school. If he could have came out after he won the Doak Walker Award as the best running back in the nation, I think we're talking about Ollie a little bit different. Now, the caveat on that is Oklahoma State was dog shit this year. I mean, they were bad. They were bad. They started off not great, and it just got worse. They kept changing quarterbacks. It was just a dumpster fire down there this year. Ollie didn't really have a chance. I mean, everything that could go wrong went wrong with that team. And so I really, when I'm evaluating him, I'm looking at his last season. Now, bigger guy, 6'1", 226. My question is it 226 really what he plays at? He felt like he was bigger than that at school, and then maybe he lost a little weight for the combine. At the 4.61 again. If you're bigger, if you're closer to 230 and you run a 4.61, that's really nice. That's nice. If you're closer to 220, 4.6 is not great because we just talked about 2 guys that ran in the 4.7s at 220. So that's a little bit of an iffy. He did have a 10 broad jump, 34 vert. So solid numbers. His 10-yard split was better than his breakaway speed. He had a 1.6, a 1.6. Anything in the low 1.5s is really, really good. So a 1.6 10-yard split, not bad. Not bad. When he won the Doak Walker and everything else, 1,700 yards, 6-1 carry, was receiving at 39 catches, 330 yards. It was just a whole different beast the year before. I mean, he just really suffered last year. Some comps I've seen for him, and I don't love it, but and this is not my comp, so I want to be honest with everybody. This is a comp I saw from the NFL, from Lance Zierlein from NFL.com. He comped him to Brian Robinson Jr., and I think that kind of makes sense. I think he could be a Brian Robinson type of player. I think the people who were big Ollie Gordon fans will hear that and be like, ugh, I thought I liked him better than that. But Brian Robinson, now we're going to look at the positive. Brian Robinson's been a lot better of a fantasy player than I think a lot of people thought he would ever be. So, could he be that type of player and give you solid production in fantasy in the NFL? I think he could. In the right system, I think he could do that. Draft wise, I have to be honest with you, I'm probably not going to have any Ollie Gordon. And the reason why is people are going to know the name. They're going to take him a little higher than I like him. And so I'm going to end up getting Devin Neal and RJ Harvey and Cam Scatterbo. If I'm drafting in that same range, I'm taking one of those guys over Ollie Gordon. And so if Ollie Gordon gets the end of the third round, would I snag him up? Absolutely. But I'm probably not taking him in the second. I'm not. And that's where he's going right now for most people. We'll see what happens when it goes NFL wise. Is it a Braylon Allen situation where he drops to like late fourth, early fifth round, and then people are out on him, and he was a guy that everybody pre-draft had him going in the second round of fantasy, and the next thing you know, where everyone's drafting him at the beginning of the fourth round? If he's at the beginning of the fourth round, I'm taking my shot for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm not taking him in the late second round. I'm just not.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Yeah, he's a guy that the draft capital, I think, is going to be very telling. But it's, this class in general, man, is just, there's a lot to be excited about. I mean, we've already talked about 10, 11, 12 running backs. There's still 2 running backs in my personal top 12 we haven't even talked about yet that we're not going to get into tonight. We'll save that for another day. And then, so Damian Martinez, DJ Giddens. We didn't talk about LaQuint.
I like all those guys better than Ollie.
Right. Yeah, they're
I like all those guys better than Ollie. Yeah, and there's guys
Rashad
lower.
Smith, Woody Marks, Taj Brooks.
You see, I love Woody Marks. So if it was me personally, now you brought him up, I would rather wait to the fourth round and take Woody Marks than I would Ollie Gordon at the late second. With a receiving profile, I like him better as a player.
Bloomer, but yeah,
he's a late bloomer. I like him as a player, but I love his receiving profile. If you go back and watch him at Mississippi State, he had 70 catches as a running back one year. I mean, he's a guy I think can translate. And then, I won't get into it because Jorge, we've already run this to an hour and a half. But like LaQuint Allen is a guy that I think is super underrated from Syracuse. I love LaQuint Allen. I think the only person that likes LaQuint Allen as much as me is Mel Kiper. He's the only person other than me that I hear talking about LaQuint Allen from Syracuse all the time. Great receiving profile, has been fantastic. He's another guy, I think if he went back to school, he would have been way higher up draft boards, not being in this loaded class. But he's a guy that I'm like, hey, if I'm missing out on those top running backs in the first round or top of the second round, I'm just going to load up and take 2, 3, 4 guys in the third, fourth round if I can. And I'm going to take a Woody Marks. I'm going to take LaQuint Allen. I'm just going to pile up on all those guys and see if somebody hits.
All right, guys, before we round out the show real quickly, each of you give your top 4 running backs that we've discussed in this episode today. Drew, let's start with you.
Top 4. Okay. I got Ashton GT at 1, not Cam Scatterboo. Just to make that clear. Ashton GT at 1, Omarion Hampton at 2, Trayvon Henderson at 3, and then Quinshon Judkins at 4.
What about you, JT?
I'm right with him. GT, Hampton, Henderson, Judkins are my top 4.
All right, that's going to do it for Dynasty 365. We will be back next week talking wide receivers. Next week, folks, we have a lot of stuff going on, and something that we have not talked about enough that we need to talk about is, first of all, we got to give a shout out to Stacy Perez here at Fantasy and Frames. Just masterful work planning the Fantasy and Frames Women's Best Ball Tournament. Again, second year that we're doing it. Last year, we had 36 women compete in the tournament. This year, we have 60 participants, 60 women wanting to join this tournament here. And quite frankly, we could have gone higher than that. But at that point, we've reached our max
right.
that we can do. And these will be all live drafts. Okay. We will be broadcasting them on the Fantasy and Frames channel. So just be prepared for that. Next Wednesday is going to be kind of crazy because, believe it or not, we can actually stream multiple shows to our channel at the very same time. So literally you have your choice of, you can watch Dynasty 365 where we talk about wide receivers. You can watch Shoot the Gap where we do IDP free agency fallout. You can watch your Fourth and Frames where we're talking about offensive free agency fallout. Or you can watch one of the women's best ball drafts for the Fantasy and Frames Women's Best Ball Tournament. So literally, we have a plethora of stuff to do. So again, shout out to Stacy Perez. Just amazing work organizing all this. And what better way to do it than in Women's History Month? Like literally, folks, like this is such an important thing. It really is chef's kiss. And Stacy needs all the flowers in the world. One of these pioneers in the fantasy football community, I believe, in just bringing more awareness to women in fantasy football. So shout out to you, Stacy, and everybody participating in these drafts. We got Stacy doing the broadcasting the draft. Kevin Tompkins, I know, is going to be involved. I know Keith Fleming is going to be involved. Erica Brown is going to be involved. And then we're going to get other guests to join. So just really stay tuned for that, for all the drafts. We got drafts, just to give you an idea, live drafts that will be broadcast on Fantasy and Frames on March 18th, 19th, 22nd, 28th, and 30th. Just amazing work. Just amazing work. So just kudos to you. And so thank you, Drew. It's been awesome having you on Dynasty 365 the past few weeks. I know you're going to Fourth and Frames, so we're going to miss you. Man, it's always great talking shop with you, man, and you're always welcome to come back whenever you have time on Dynasty 365. But I'm really excited for you getting the gang back together. You, Nate, Rhett, and we got Aiden joining. You got Kyle joining. Like you got a whole full house next week.
Packed show next week, man. It's going to be a lot of fun talking free agency, what the redraft implications are. Just getting back to the true to the roots where it all started for me is redraft fantasy football is where everything started for me. So it's always fun to get back to your roots.
Absolutely. And JT, you and I will be back next week for 365 and for Shoot the Gap. And we got Gary Davenport, the godfather of IDP, joining us on Shoot the Gap to talk IDP free agency fallout. If you haven't already, head over to fantasyandframes.com, read all of our breaking news articles. Just fantastic work we're putting out there. We got IDP stuff coming as well. You can start checking out some of our rookie rankings over at fantasyandframes.com this weekend. Again, if you haven't already, head over to all of our social media channels, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Blue Sky, Twitter, like everywhere. We're there. Follow us at Fantasy and Frames, as well as head over to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe and like, and we really appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight. It's really an honor when we have a late show and we get such a big crowd going. It really is. It really does mean a lot to us. So we really do appreciate that. So for Drew, JT, I'm Jorge. We will see you all next week.